She threw her medical bag into the dirt and screamed, not from fear, not from exhaustion, from the kind of fury that only comes when a woman has done everything right and still lost everything. The door of that boarding house was still swinging shut behind her. Red Hollow Creek had made its decision. She was not welcome here. But she wasn't leaving either. If you love stories about women who refuse to break, subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Evelyn Carter had buried 3 people in the last 2 weeks. She hadn't killed any of them. But in this part of the country, in the summer of 1883, facts didn't matter as much as stories. And the story that followed her from Creston Falls to the base of the Red Hollow Mountains had been carefully constructed by people who had far more to lose from the truth than she did. She was 31 years old. She had studied medicine under Dr. Harold Fitch for 6 years longer than most men who called themselves doctors in these territories. She had delivered babies in the middle of blizzards, set broken limbs by firelight, and once performed an emergency surgery on a miner's abdomen using nothing but a skinning knife, carbolic acid, and a steadiness of hand that Fitch himself said he'd never seen in 30 years of practice. None of that was the story people told about her. The story people told was simpler, uglier, the way most lies are. She had been accused of negligence in Creston Falls after 3 patients died within the same week. 2 from a fever epidemic that had already swept through 4 surrounding towns and killed dozens, and 1 from a gunshot wound that had already gone septic before he was brought to her door at 2 in the morning. A man named Victor Hale, who owned the largest dry goods operation in Creston Falls and who had lost a nephew in that epidemic, decided that grief needed somewhere to land. He chose Evelyn. By the time she understood what was happening, her name had already been dragged through 2 newspapers and a county commissioner's hearing. She wasn't charged with a crime, she was simply finished. The kind of finish that doesn't require a courtroom. The kind that just closes every door in front of you one by one until you have no choice but to walk away from everything you built. She had walked 300 miles in 6 weeks, mostly on foot, occasionally on a borrowed mule, through heat that cracked the earth and turned creek beds into white dust. She arrived in Red Hollow Creek at 4:30 in the afternoon, on the hottest day of July, with $2.30 in her coat pocket, a medical bag that weighed more than her pride, and a name that so far no one in this town knew yet. She intended to keep it that way. Her first stop was the boarding house on the main road, a 2-story wooden building with a painted sign that said, "Rooms clean and reasonable." A woman answered the door, mid-50s, aproned. The kind of face that had once been warm and had slowly gone hard the way bread goes hard when it's left out too long. "I'm looking for a room," Evelyn said. "Just a few nights, maybe a week if the work holds." "What kind of work?" the woman asked. "Medical, nursing. I'm trained." The woman looked at her the way people look at something they're already deciding they don't want. A slow look. Starting at the boots worn through at the left heel and moving upward past the dusty coat, and the worn collar, and the single braid that had mostly come undone somewhere around the 14th mile of the day. "You got a husband?" the woman asked. "No." "Family in town?" "No." References. Evelyn had references. She had 6 years of them. She had letters from Dr. Fitch and a midwife in Carson County, and 2 circuit nurses who had worked alongside her in field hospitals during the cholera outbreak of 1879. Those letters were in her bag. She almost reached for them. But something in the woman's face told her it wouldn't matter. "I can pay 2 nights in advance," Evelyn said instead. "I don't rent to unaccompanied women," the woman said. "Policy." "That's not a policy," Evelyn said quietly. "That's a choice." The door closed. Not violently, not with anger. That was almost worse. It closed the way people close doors on things they've already stopped thinking about. Clean, final, indifferent. Evelyn stood on the porch for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked back down the steps. She tried the hotel at the far end of the main road. Different building. Same answer delivered by a man, this time red-faced and already sweating through his collar at 4 in the afternoon. "We don't have accommodations for single women traveling alone," he said. "You'd want to speak to Reverend Howell at the church. He sometimes arranges for Christian families to take in—" "I don't need charity," Evelyn said. "I need a room I can pay for." "Ma'am, I understand, but do you have vacancies?" A pause. "We do." "Then you don't have a shortage of rooms. You have a policy about women." She left before he could answer. The church was a consideration, for about 3 seconds. She had nothing against God in principle, but she had learned that reverends in small western towns tended to offer shelter in exchange for the kind of scrutiny she could not currently afford. Questions about where she'd come from, why she'd left, whether there was a husband somewhere who might come looking. She needed to be invisible for a little while. She needed to work, earn enough to get north to the next town and disappear before anyone thought to write a letter to Creston Falls. She sat down on the steps of the general store, which was closed for the evening, and looked at her options. Across the main road, diagonal from where she was sitting, she could see a forge. The fire inside it was still going despite the hour glowing orange in the fading light. She could hear the rhythmic sound of metal striking metal, the kind of steady, patient percussion that meant someone who wasn't finished working yet, someone who kept their own hours. A blacksmith's shop. At the end of a long, brutal day. Not promising. Smiths didn't rent rooms. But Smiths sometimes knew people. Smiths were in the center of town commerce. They heard things. They knew which families might be looking for a hired hand or a nurse or a woman willing to work for a room and meals for a week. It was a long shot. She was out of shorter shots. She crossed the road. The forge was larger up close than it had looked from a distance. A serious operation, multiple anvils, a wide bellows, a cooling rack along the far wall hung with iron hardware in various stages of completion. Horseshoes and wagon wheel rims and tools whose names she didn't know. The heat inside was enormous. How anyone worked in this already brutal July heat with a forge burning at full temperature was something she genuinely could not fathom. The man at the anvil didn't hear her come in. Or if he heard her, he didn't stop. He was finishing something, a long rhythmic sequence of strikes that had a logic to it, a pattern like he was counting in his head. She waited. He was tall. Not dramatically so, but in the way that becomes obvious when a man is working the full reach of him, the extension of arm and shoulder, the way the hammer came down, not from brute force, but from controlled weight. He wore his sleeves rolled past the elbow, and a leather apron darkened from years of use. There was a scar that ran from his left wrist up the inside of his forearm and disappeared under the rolled fabric. She noticed it, the way she noticed everything on a person clinically first, and then humanly once the clinical part was done. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples. He hadn't shaved in a few days. The lines in his face were the kind that come from weather and work, and something else the kind that come from carrying things for a long time. He set the hammer down, turned to the water barrel, dunked his hands, and then he turned around and saw her. He didn't jump, didn't reach for anything. Just looked at her with a steadiness that she found immediately unusual. Most men, when they found a strange woman standing in their forge uninvited, had a reaction. Surprise, annoyance, wariness, something. This man just looked at her the way you look at something you're going to have to make a decision about. "Help you," he said. His voice was low, not unfriendly. Not friendly either, just direct. "I'm looking for information," she said. "Not charity. I'm a nurse trained, not apprentice trained. I mean formally studied, and I've just come into town, and I'm having some difficulty finding accommodations. I thought you might know of a family looking for domestic help, or someone who needs medical attention, and might be willing to arrange something temporary in exchange." He looked at her for a long moment. "You try the boarding house?" he asked. "Yes." "Mrs. Aldine turn you away?" "She did." "Hargrove's Hotel?" "Him too." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, more like confirmation of something he already knew about this town. "How long you been walking today?" he asked. She almost said it wasn't relevant. "Since before dawn," she said instead. He was quiet for a moment. He looked past her toward the road where the last of the afternoon light was going amber and thick. Then he looked at the sky to the northwest, where the clouds had been building since midday, the dark kind, the kind that didn't just threaten. "Storm's coming," he said. "I noticed." "Red Hollow storms are different from flatland storms," he said. "Mountain weather. Comes in fast and hits hard. You don't want to be outside in it. I'm aware of that," she said. "Which is why I'm here." Another silence. He picked up a rag from the edge of the anvil and wiped his hands. He looked at her medical bag, then at her face. "You got a name," he said. "Evelyn Carter. Caleb Morgan." He didn't offer his hand, just said it. "You eat anything today?" The question caught her off guard. She had been preparing for negotiation for conditions for the careful laying out of terms. She had not been prepared for that question delivered that plainly without preamble. "Not since this morning," she said, before she could decide whether admitting it was wise. He nodded. Like that settled something. "There's a room at the back of the house," he said. "Used to be a storage room. I cleared it out last winter. There's a cot and a window. It's not comfortable. I've slept in worse. Door latches from the inside," he said. "That matters, I expect?" She looked at him. "It does," she said. "I'm not asking anything from you," he said. "Not work, not money, not conversation. You need somewhere to sleep through the storm and figure your next move. That's the room." He picked up his hammer again. "House is through the back of the forge. Doors unlocked. Kitchen's on the left. There's bread on the counter and water on the stove." He turned back to the anvil. As if that was all there was to say about it, she stood there for a moment waiting for the condition, the complication, the thing that made this not what it appeared to be. It didn't come. "Mr. Morgan," she said. He glanced back. "Why?" she asked. He thought about it. Or maybe he didn't think about it at all. Maybe the answer was already there and he just had to decide whether to say it. "Because it's going to storm," he said, "and the boarding house door was wrong to close." He went back to his hammering. The rhythm of it followed her through the back of the forge and into the small house beyond. The kitchen was exactly as he'd described. Bread on the counter still soft enough that it hadn't been baked more than a day ago. A pot of water on the stove, warm but not boiling. He'd left it low, which meant he'd thought about someone coming in and needing it. Whether he'd been thinking of her specifically, or just kept it that way, was a question she decided not to examine too closely. She ate standing at the counter, half the bread and 2 cups of water. She forced herself to slow down because her body's inclination was to eat the entire loaf in 60 seconds, and she had enough self-possession left to know that was not a good idea after a day like this one. The storm arrived while she was still in the kitchen. She heard it before she felt it, a change in air pressure that she registered in her ears first, then a sound like a freight train somewhere up in the mountains, and then the first fat drops hammering the roof like fists. In 30 seconds, it went from that to a full wall of water. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in under a minute. She stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to it. Through the back wall of the forge, she could still hear him working. She found the storage room. He hadn't been lying about the cot. It was narrow, and the mattress had seen better decades, but there was a wool blanket folded at the foot of it that smelled clean, like cedar and lanolin, and the latch on the inside of the door was solid iron and worked exactly as he'd said it would. She sat on the edge of the cot and took off her boots, which was the first time she'd done that in 16 hours. She opened her medical bag and checked her supplies out of habit. It was something she did every night, had done every night for 6 years. Bandages, carbolic suturing thread, laudanum, the small surgical kit in its oilcloth wrapping. Everything accounted for. Everything intact. She lay back on the cot with the blanket pulled up and stared at the ceiling while the storm raged outside. She thought about Creston Falls, about the letter she'd written to Dr. Fitch that she'd never sent because she didn't know what to say in it. About the look on the boarding house woman's face this afternoon, not cruel exactly, just closed. The particular expression of someone who has made a habit of protecting their peace by deciding quickly about people and never revisiting those decisions. She thought about Caleb Morgan. She wasn't sure what to make of him. She had developed over 6 years of working in proximity to men in difficult circumstances, miners, soldiers, ranchers, laborers, a reasonably reliable sense of when a man's kindness had a structure underneath it, a purpose, or an angle, or an expectation that hadn't been stated yet. That sense had protected her more than once. She wasn't getting that from him. She was getting something else, something she didn't have a clean word for. Not kindness exactly. It wasn't soft enough to be kindness. More like a kind of recognition. The way one person who has been through something looks at another person who has been through something and doesn't bother with the preamble. He hadn't asked where she'd come from. He hadn't asked why she was alone. He had asked if she'd eaten. She was still thinking about that when she fell asleep to the sound of the storm breaking itself against the mountains. She woke at first light to silence. The storm had exhausted itself sometime in the night. Through the small window above the cot, she could see the sky going pink and gray in the east, still streaked with cloud, but clearing. The air that came through the gap at the bottom of the window was 20 degrees cooler than the day before. Wet and clean. She heard movement in the kitchen. She lay still for a moment listening. Footsteps deliberate, unhurried, the sound of a fire being built in the stove, the clink of iron cookware. She got up, pulled on her boots, ran water from the basin on the small shelf beside the cot over her face and hands, and went to the kitchen door. He was at the stove. He'd already been to the forge, she could tell from the coal dust on his forearms, and was now cracking eggs into a pan with the focus of a man who took the practical aspects of living seriously. He heard her in the doorway and glanced back. "Storm's clear," he said. "Coffee's ready." She sat at the kitchen table. He set a cup in front of her without being asked. "I want to talk about terms," she said. He looked at her from across the stove. "Terms," he repeated. "I don't accept charity," she said. "Not from strangers. I don't know you and you don't know me, and I intend to keep it that way for both our sakes. But that doesn't mean I'm comfortable being in your debt. So I want to discuss what I can do in exchange for the use of that room." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you offering?" he said. "Medical services," she said. "Whatever you need and haven't been getting. Wound care if you've got something that hasn't healed right." She nodded at the scar on his forearm. "Or general assessments. Also labor. I can cook. I can clean. I'm organized and I learn quickly. I don't require conversation, and I won't ask questions about your business." He turned the eggs. Didn't rush his answer. "That scar," he said finally, "is 11 years old and healed exactly as much as it's going to." "All right," she said. "But my left knee," he said, "has been giving me trouble since March. Swells up after a long day. Stiffens by morning." He said it with no particular drama, just information. "If you know something useful about that, I'd call it fair." "I can look at it," she said. "Today if you want." "After breakfast," he said. He served the eggs, sat across from her. They ate without talking, which she found unexpectedly comfortable. She was used to silence being awkward men who ate with a woman and felt they had to fill the space with something conversation, or questions, or opinions. He seemed to have no such compulsion. After breakfast, he rolled up his left trouser leg without being asked and let her examine his knee. She took her time, pressed at the joint, systematically watching his face for involuntary reactions. He gave almost nothing away, but she was trained to read the small ones, the slight tightening around his eyes when she pressed the lateral side, the barely perceptible shift of his weight when she flexed the joint forward. "Old injury?" she asked. "War," he said. "Which side?" "The one that lost," he said. She absorbed that without comment. A lot of men out here were on the side that lost. It explained some things about him that she'd already noticed, the particular kind of self-sufficiency that comes from having survived something badly and had to rebuild from the inside out. "The swelling is chronic inflammation," she said. "Probably a ligament that healed improperly. I can show you some exercises that will help. And there's a compress if you can get white willow bark from the apothecary that reduces the inflammation significantly if you use it nightly." He looked at her. "That's it," he said. "Just willow bark and exercises." What were you expecting? I don't know, he said. Something more complicated. Pain usually has simple causes, she said. It's people that make it complicated. He looked at her for a moment in a way she couldn't fully read. Then he rolled his trouser leg back down. Room's yours for 2 weeks, he said. After that, we'll see where things stand. 1 week, she said. I don't like open-ended arrangements. 2, he said. That knee has been going on for 5 months. You're not going to fix it in a week. She looked at him. He had a point. Fine, she said. 2 weeks. By the end of the first week, the town knew she was there. Not from anything she did. She was careful. She went to the apothecary once, paid for what she needed, without engaging in conversation, kept her head down on the main road. She helped an elderly man who'd cut his hand on a fence post quietly at Caleb's forge while he waited for the man's horse to be reshod. The man was grateful. She asked him not to mention it. He mentioned it. That was the nature of small towns. You couldn't do something good or bad in them without the air itself seeming to carry the information outward. By day 5, she had heard herself described in 3 different ways by people who hadn't spoken to her. A woman who'd followed Caleb Morgan home from somewhere she shouldn't have been. A nurse who'd gotten herself fired from a hospital back east. A widow with unclear history. She heard these things because people in small towns also have a tendency to say things in earshot of the person they're discussing without realizing it, or sometimes knowing it perfectly well, and choosing not to care. She said nothing. Caleb, when she mentioned it to him one evening, shrugged with the particular economy of a man who had made his peace with being talked about a long time ago. Red Hollow Creek's been talking about me since I came back from the war, he said. I've stopped listening. Easy to say, she said. No, he said. It's not. But it's the right thing to do. He was at the workbench along the back wall of the forge cleaning tools. She was sitting on an upturned barrel nearby, reviewing her medical notes by the forge light. It was the first time she'd been in the main space of the forge after dark, the first time she'd lingered at all, rather than retreating to the back room. She wasn't sure why she'd stayed. Something about the rhythm of his working, the particular quality of the light. Why did you come back, she asked, to Red Hollow Creek, after the war? He kept cleaning the tool in his hands. A long pause. My father's forge, he said. He died in '67. Left it to me. I came back to sell it. Another pause. Then I didn't. Why not? He set the tool down, picked up another. Because there was nowhere else to go, he said. And because running from something just means you have to run from it again somewhere new. She looked at him. I'm not running, she said. No, he said quietly. You're walking. That's different. She thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. He wasn't wrong. The second week brought heat again, worse than before the storm, the air thicker and more relentless, and with it, the first real test of what Red Hollow Creek was going to do about her presence. It came in the form of Hargrove, the hotel owner. He showed up at the forge on a Wednesday morning with a man she didn't recognize, and an expression that she recognized immediately, the expression of someone who has organized other people's opinion of you in advance of the conversation and arrived to deliver it. Caleb was at the anvil. Evelyn was in the kitchen, visible through the open back door. She heard voices and stayed where she was. Morgan, Hargrove said. I'll be direct. You usually are, Caleb said. That woman living here? She's staying here, Caleb said. Not the same thing. The town has concerns. Reverend Howell has concerns. It doesn't look right, is the thing. A woman alone with a man, no family connection, no explanation. She's a nurse, Caleb said. She's treating my knee and staying in the back room. That's the explanation. Morgan, Hargrove. His voice was flat, not angry. Flat in the way that means a man has decided something and the conversation is already finished. You turned her away from your hotel in the middle of a storm. I didn't. What happens in my house isn't your concern. A silence. People will talk, Hargrove said. People already are, Caleb said. They'll move on when something more interesting happens. She heard footsteps leaving. She stood in the kitchen, her hands around her coffee cup, and did not move for a long time. Then she heard Caleb come through the back of the forge into the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. You heard that, he said. Yes. Are you going to apologize for being here? He asked. No, she said. He nodded. Good, he said, and went back to work. That was the moment she stopped making contingency plans about the next town north. Not consciously. She didn't decide anything. She just noticed later that evening that she hadn't thought about leaving all day. And she thought that's new. The morning Evelyn decided to stay. Really stay, not just delay leaving, began the way most consequential mornings do. With something small, something ordinary, something that shouldn't have mattered. Caleb burned his hand. Not badly. Not the kind of burn that required her involvement medically speaking. A graze across the back of 3 fingers from a piece of iron he'd misjudged the temperature of. He didn't make a sound. She only knew because she came through the forge to ask about breakfast and saw him holding his hand under the cold water barrel with the particular stillness of a man who has trained himself not to react to pain. Let me see it, she said. It's nothing, he said. I didn't ask your opinion of it, she said. I asked to see it. He turned and showed her. She took his hand, his large, scarred, coal-darkened hand in both of hers, and examined the burn without ceremony. 3 fingers, 2nd degree across the knuckles. Not dangerous, but not nothing either. You should have gloves for that part of the process, she said. I have gloves. Then why weren't you wearing them? A pause. I was moving fast, he said. You're always moving fast, she said, for a man with an inflamed knee. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, the near vicinity of one. She cleaned the burn, applied the salve she'd mixed the previous week using materials from the apothecary, and wrapped his fingers with strips of clean linen. He let her work without comment. She was aware in the practical and clinical part of her mind that this was the 3rd time in 2 weeks she'd had physical contact with his hands. The knee examination, a splinter 2 days ago, now this. She filed that information away without attaching anything to it. You need to let this breathe tonight, she said. Don't wrap it before bed. All right, he said. She started to step back. He looked at his wrapped hand. Evelyn, he said. She stopped. He almost never used her name. She had noticed that. He referred to her in conversation with others as Miss Carter, and in direct address used nothing at all, just the sentence beginning without a salutation. Hearing him say it now without preamble, first name direct, was enough to make her pause. There's a woman, he said, named Clara Hughes, lives on the south edge of town. Her husband came to the forge yesterday to have his wagon axle repaired. He mentioned not to me directly to the boy who helps me on Thursdays that Clara's been unwell for 3 weeks. Fever, he said, but she won't see the doctor in town. Why not? Evelyn asked. The town doctor is Hargrove's brother-in-law, Caleb said. She absorbed that. And you're telling me this because I thought you might want to know, he said, and because Tom Hughes is a decent man, and he's scared, and the boy told me he cried when he said it, quietly, in the back of the forge, when he thought no one could see. She looked at him. He was looking at his wrapped hand. What's the fever like? She asked. Did the boy say? 3 weeks running. Some days worse than others. She's keeping water down, but not food. 3 weeks of intermittent fever. Keeping fluids. Not eating. She was already moving through the differential in her head. Typhoid had to go on the list immediately, though the timeline was long for that, and she'd need to know about the water source. Malaria was possible this far east of the river valleys, though less likely. Tuberculosis presented differently. Brucellosis, if they had cattle. I'll go today, she said. He looked up. I don't know if Tom will. Then I'll go and see, she said. If he turns me away, I'll come back and you'll have lost nothing. But if his wife is 3 weeks into a fever and not eating, she doesn't have a lot of time left to wait on people making decisions about whether to accept help. He held her gaze for a moment. "Take the horse," he said. "South Road, last house before the creek bend. Red gate." She took the horse. Tom Hughes opened his door and looked at her with the wariness of a man who had been let down recently and was operating on a very thin reserve of trust. "Mr. Hughes," she said. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm a trained nurse. Caleb Morgan sent me. I understand your wife has been ill." "Caleb sent you," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at her, at the medical bag, back at her face. "She won't see Dr. Pullman," he said. There was an incident last year." "She won't. She doesn't have to see Dr. Pullman," Evelyn said. "She just has to let me look at her. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes. If she wants me to leave after that, I'll leave." Another pause. From somewhere inside the house came a sound, thin, tired, the sound of someone shifting in a bed. Tom Hughes stepped back from the door. She went in. Clara Hughes was 34 years old and looked 10 years older than that right now. The way fever does to a person, hollows them, makes the bones more visible, takes some essential brightness from the eyes. But her eyes themselves were sharp. She watched Evelyn come through the bedroom door with the alertness of someone who had been lying in a bed for 3 weeks and had developed a finely tuned sense for every new thing that entered the room. "Tom said Caleb sent you," Clara said. Her voice was rough from disuse. "He did," Evelyn said. She set her bag down, pulled the chair from the corner to the bedside, sat down at eye level. She didn't reach for anything in the bag yet. "How are you feeling right now?" "This morning." "Like I've been sick for 3 weeks," Clara said. Dry, precise. "Worse in the morning or the evening?" "Evening." "Any pain in your abdomen?" A pause. "Some?" "Lower right side." "Not bad." "Chills during the night?" "Every night." Evelyn talked to her for 10 minutes before she did anything clinical. She asked about the water they used, the well or the creek. She asked about food, what she'd been able to keep down and what she hadn't. She asked about the onset, had there been a specific bad day, or had it crept up gradually. She asked about their cattle, their chickens. She asked whether anyone else in the surrounding houses had been ill. Clara answered everything, watched her the whole time. "You're not from here," Clara said between questions. "No," Evelyn said. "Where are you from?" "Most recently, Creston Falls." Clara absorbed that without comment. If she knew what had happened in Creston Falls, she gave no sign of it. "May I examine you?" Evelyn asked. Clara glanced at the door. Tom was visible in the hallway standing there, because he couldn't not the way frightened husbands stand in doorways. "Tom," Clara said, "go make coffee." He went. Evelyn examined her carefully and thoroughly. By the end of it, she had a working diagnosis that wasn't typhoid. The pattern was wrong. The water source was a sealed well, and there was no rose spot rash. What she was looking at was more likely a sustained infection following what Clara, under gentle questioning, finally described as a difficult delivery 8 months ago that had gone poorly and been handled by Dr. Pullman in a way that Clara described only as not right, a postpartum infection that had gone chronic. Poorly treated or mistreated in the initial weeks, now living in her system in a low-grade, persistent form that her body couldn't fully fight off. It was serious. It wasn't hopeless. "The baby?" Evelyn asked quietly. Clara's face changed. "Gone," she said. 3 days after. A silence. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, and she meant it not as a formality, but as something she'd said at enough bedsides to know the full weight of. Clara looked at her. "Can you help me?" Clara asked. Not plaintively, directly. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I believe I can. It's going to take time. We're dealing with something that's had months to settle in, and we have to be careful not to overwhelm your system. But I have seen this pattern before, and I know what works." Something in Clara's face shifted. Not relief exactly, too cautious for that. but the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something very heavy and has just been told they might be allowed to set it down. "What do I need to do?" she asked. She was back at the forge by early afternoon. Caleb looked up when she came in, and the question was in his face before she said anything. "She's manageable," Evelyn said. "It'll take time. I need to go back every 2 days for the next 2 weeks, possibly longer." He nodded. "Take the horse when you need it," he said. "I can walk," she said. "South Road in July, heat is 4 miles each way," he said. "Take the horse." She looked at him. "You're very accustomed to making decisions," she said. "I'm accustomed to being practical," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Take the horse, Evelyn." She took the horse. The first twist came 6 days later, and it didn't come from the direction she'd been watching. She had been watching Hargrove. She had been watching the town's edges, the small hostilities, the woman at the market who turned her back, the group outside the church on Sunday, who went quiet when she passed. She had been watching for the escalation she knew was coming, because she'd been in enough small towns to know they always escalated before they settled. What she hadn't been watching was Clara's neighbor. His name was Deacon Price. She learned this from Tom Hughes, who told her with the careful neutrality of a man trying not to editorialize that Price had been asking around town about the woman staying at Morgan's place. Asking specifically about where she'd come from, what her credentials were, whether anyone had verified them. "Why?" Evelyn asked. Tom looked at his boots. "He lost his wife 2 years ago," Tom said, "to a doctor passing through. Not a real doctor, turned out. Man just had a bag and enough talk to sound convincing." He looked up. "Price has been against any medical person coming through town who isn't Pullman ever since. He was the one who, when the last midwife tried to set up practice here, he's the one who pushed until she left." Evelyn was very still. "Does he know about Clara?" she asked. "I don't know," Tom said. "I don't think so. But Evelyn—" He stopped. Said her name awkwardly, like he wasn't sure he'd earned it. "He's been talking to people, asking about Creston Falls." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. She rode back to the forge and told Caleb that evening. He listened without interrupting. His hands were clasped in front of him on the kitchen table, the bandaged one and the unbandaged one, and he looked at them while she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Price is a hard man," he said finally. "He's not a bad one, I think, but he's a hard one. And when a hard man gets a fixed idea about something, it becomes like a mission." "I know what it becomes," she said. "I've seen it." He looked at her. "You want to leave?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I should leave," she said, "before he finds out about Clara. Before whatever he's digging up from Creston Falls becomes a conversation in the middle of the main road. I should leave while I still have a head start." "And Clara," he said quietly. A silence. She had been trying not to think about Clara. She had been trying to hold Clara at the necessary clinical distance patient case situation so that the leaving would be cleaner. It wasn't working. "Clara needs 2 more weeks of treatment minimum," she said. "If I stop now, she could relapse into something worse. She's at the fragile part. The part where people think they're getting better and stop the regimen and then go backward." "Then you can't leave," he said. "Caleb, you know you can't," he said. Not harsh, not commanding, just level, just true. "You know it, and I know it, and you wouldn't be sitting at this table telling me about Price instead of already packing your bag if you didn't." She looked at him. He was right. She hated that he was right. "If Price finds out what happened in Creston Falls," she started. "Let him find out," Caleb said. "What happened in Creston Falls?" She stopped. He held her gaze. "What actually happened," he said. "Not the story, the actual thing." She had not told anyone the actual thing since she left. She had been carrying it the way you carry something with sharp edges carefully, with the sharp parts turned inward because you've learned it's less dangerous that way. She told him, All of it. Victor Hale and the epidemic and the 3 patients and the hearing and the newspaper. The specifics not defensively, not with the practiced calm she'd used in her own head to maintain her sanity during the worst of it, but plainly. The way you tell someone when you've stopped performing the version of it, you can survive, and started telling the version that's true. He listened without his expression changing. Not stone-faced, she would have read that as judgment held in check. He just listened. The way some people listen when they're actually doing it. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the cicadas outside. "You didn't kill those people," he said. "I know that," she said. "Then Price's digging won't find what he's looking for," he said. "It'll find enough," she said. "It always does. People don't need the whole truth. They need enough of it to close the question." He was quiet again. Then he said, "My father's forge was the only thing he left me when he died. The house was already leveraged for debts I didn't know about. Everything else, the furniture, the horses, even his tools had to go to settle what he owed. All I had was this building and the equipment inside it. When I came back from the war, I had a knee that didn't work right and a reputation for—" He paused. "Some things happened during the war. Things that looked one way from the outside and were another way from the inside. When I came home, the things that looked one way were what this town knew." She looked at him. "What things?" she asked. He looked at his hands. "I ordered a retreat," he said, "at a place called Pharaoh's Ridge. I had 12 men. We were outnumbered 8-1 and our position was indefensible, and I ordered us to fall back. 2 men refused. They died. The story that came back to Red Hollow Creek was that I'd left men behind to save myself." A long silence. "That's not what happened," she said. "No," he said. "But it's what got told." She looked at him. Something that had been held at a certain careful distance in her chest moved closer. "So you came back anyway," she said, "to a town that believed that about you." "There was nowhere else to go," he said. "And I was done running." She thought about the walk from Creston Falls. 300 miles. 6 weeks. She thought about the way she'd told herself it wasn't running, it was moving forward, it was strategic, it was practical. She thought about what he'd said on the second morning running, just means you have to run from it again somewhere new. "How long," she asked, "before it changed, before people—" "Some of them haven't," he said simply. "Hargrove still looks at me like he's already decided. But most people eventually just care more about their own lives than about yours. They get tired of the story." He paused. "It takes time. That's the ugly part. It takes time and you can't rush it, and there's no trick to it." She was quiet. "I don't know if I have that kind of time," she said. "Nobody does," he said. "You just decide if you're going to stay or not." She looked at the table, at her hands, at the medical bag sitting by the back door, still packed, still ready the way she'd kept it for 6 weeks. "Price is going to come," she said. "Probably," Caleb said. "And when he does, it's going to be bad. People are already halfway decided. He'll just give them the rest of the way." "Probably," Caleb said again. "That doesn't worry you?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "It worries me," he said. "But you asked what worries me, not what I'm going to do about it." "What are you going to do about it?" "Same thing I've been doing," he said. "Keep the door open. Let you make your own choice. And if Price comes looking for a fight, give him one." Something in her chest did the thing it had been edging toward for days. She looked down before he could see it in her face. "I'll stay," she said, "until Clara's through the worst of it." He nodded like that was what he'd expected. He stood up, took both coffee cups to the basin, rinsed them the way he rinsed everything thoroughly, without wasted motion. "Get some sleep," he said. "You've got a long ride tomorrow." She stood, picked up her bag, walked to the back room door. "Caleb," she said. He looked over his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, "for listening." He turned back to the basin. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," he said. But she heard something in his voice that hadn't been there before. something that sounded carefully and quietly like relief. Deacon Price came to the forge on a Friday. She wasn't there. She was at Clara's doing the 5th visit, watching the fever finally starting to break its 3-week hold. Clara had eaten a full breakfast that morning for the first time since May. Tom had gripped Evelyn's arm in the kitchen doorway and said nothing, because there were no words adequate to what he was feeling. And Evelyn had understood that and said nothing back. She was riding back along the South Road when she saw the commotion. Not a crowd, just enough people gathered near the forge to be visible from a distance. 6 or 7. Price was easy to identify, not because she'd seen him before, but because he was the one standing in the center with the posture of a man making a formal accusation. She pulled the horse up. She could ride past. She could go around the back, come in through the house, let Caleb handle it. She rode straight in. The gathering went quiet when they saw her. Price turned. He was in his late 50s, gray-bearded, heavy-set, with the particular dignity of a man who has suffered and decided that his suffering gives him authority. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Price," she said. She hadn't met him. He knew her name anyway. That told her everything about how the last few days had gone. "I was just asking Mr. Morgan," Price said, "about your qualifications." "Then ask me," she said. Caleb was standing at the forge door. His arms were at his sides. His face was composed. He looked at her briefly, a quick assessment, the kind that checks if someone's all right, and then back at Price. "I've asked some questions," Price said, "about Creston Falls." "I assumed you had," she said. 3 patients died under your care. 3 patients died during an epidemic that killed 47 people in 4 surrounding counties," she said. "And 1 died from a septic wound 2 days old before I ever touched him. That's the complete sentence. What version did you get?" A murmur from the small gathering. Price's jaw tightened. "A man named Victor Hale says." "Victor Hale is the uncle of one of the epidemic victims," Evelyn said. "He needed someone to be responsible for something that no one was responsible for except the disease itself. I understand why he chose me. I've never agreed that he was right." "You lost your practice." "I left Creston Falls," she said. "There was no formal finding against me at the county hearing. The record shows that. If you wrote to the county clerk and got the hearing transcript, you'll have read that yourself." A pause. Price had written to the county clerk. She could see it in the small hesitation. "The hearing didn't find against you," he said carefully. "But that's not the same as—" "No," she said. "It's not the same as an exoneration, and it's not the same as an indictment. It's the same as the truth, which is that the evidence didn't support the accusation. That's what hearings are for." She held his gaze. "I know what happened to your wife, Mr. Price," she said, and watched his face change. "I heard about it when I got to town. I'm sorry, genuinely. What was done to her was wrong, and the man who did it was not a doctor and should never have been allowed to practice. I understand why you're standing here." A pause. "But I am not that man, and you standing here will not bring her back." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Price looked at her for a long time. "Mrs. Hughes," he said finally, "you've been treating Clara Hughes." It was not a question. Someone had told him. "Yes," she said. "And—" She met his eyes directly. "She ate breakfast this morning," Evelyn said. "First full meal in 3 weeks." Something crossed Price's face. Something that was not the thing he'd come here with. Complicated and human and harder to sustain than anger. He looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing. He was watching Price with the calm of a man who has already decided what he believes and is waiting to see what everyone else decides. Price looked back at Evelyn. He didn't apologize. She hadn't expected him to. Men like Price rarely apologized in front of witnesses. It cost too much in front of other people. Maybe alone later it would come out differently. Maybe not. But he turned around. He walked back through the small gathering which parted for him. The people who'd gathered watched him go. Then they looked at each other. Then one by one, they drifted back to their own business. Not convinced, most of them. Not converted. But without the direction that Price's certainty had given them, they had nothing to organize around. Evelyn stayed on the horse until they were all gone. Then she dismounted, tied the horse at the post, walked past Caleb into the forge without looking at him. She heard him behind her. "You didn't have to ride in?" he said. "Yes, I did," she said. "You could have let me—" "No," she said. "I couldn't have." She turned around. "I'm done letting other people stand in front of things that belong to me, good or bad. It's mine to stand in front of." He looked at her. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. And that was the afternoon everything quietly, irrevocably shifted. Not into anything they named, not yet, but into something different from what it had been, less like two strangers sharing space under careful terms, and more like two people who had each other's back and were only now beginning to understand what that meant. She went to make coffee. He went back to the anvil, but the forge felt different, warmer somehow than the fire inside it could account for. The shift happened quietly the way most real things do, not in a single moment, not in a confession or a dramatic declaration. It happened the way water finds its level gradually without announcement, until one day you look and realize the landscape has changed, and you can't point to when exactly it changed, only that it has. It was the third week of August when Evelyn stopped locking her door at night. She didn't decide to stop. She just noticed one morning that she hadn't, and then noticed she didn't feel the need to correct it. That was the whole of it. Small. Enormous. Caleb noticed too. She could tell by the way he didn't say anything about it, the same way he hadn't said anything when she started leaving her coffee cup on his side of the kitchen table, or when she began keeping her notes spread across the workbench in the evenings, while he cleaned tools, the two of them occupying the same space with the particular ease that only comes after people have been through something together and survived it. Clara was improving. Not in the dramatic sudden way that made for good stories, but in the real way. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, her body negotiating its own terms with the infection that had lived in it for 8 months. She was eating consistently now. The fever broke and held broken for 5 days straight, which was the longest stretch yet. Tom Hughes had taken to leaving a jar of honey on his front gate every time Evelyn made the South Road ride without comment, without expectation. Just honey. As if there were no words adequate, and honey was the closest thing. The town had not warmed to her. She wasn't naive enough to expect that, but it had changed in texture less like an active hostility and more like a wary observation. People watched her instead of turning away. Some of them nodded. A few spoke. Mrs. Aldine, the boarding house woman, had passed her on the main road 3 days after the Price confrontation, and said nothing, but she hadn't turned her back either. She'd kept walking, and so had Evelyn, and there was something in that mutual acknowledgement of each other's existence that felt in context almost like progress. Reverend Howell had sent a note to the forge, a polite note carefully worded, suggesting that Miss Carter might be welcome to join the Sunday service if she wished. Caleb had handed it to her without comment. She had looked at it for a moment and then set it on the kitchen table. She hadn't decided yet. But the fact that the note existed was its own kind of data point about how things were moving. It was Caleb who disrupted the equilibrium, not on purpose. He was not a man who did things on purpose that he could do accidentally. But he disrupted it nonetheless on a Tuesday evening in the middle of the 3rd week when he said something that he probably hadn't meant to say at all. She had been telling him about Clara's progress, the specific details, the dosing schedule, the response pattern, because she'd found that talking through her cases out loud helped her think, and he listened without interrupting in a way that was genuinely useful rather than performatively polite. He asked good questions when he asked them. She'd discovered a practical intelligence that didn't announce itself, the kind that just shows up in how a person thinks through problems. She was in the middle of describing the compression she'd used for the inflammation when he said without looking up from the hinge he was repairing. "You talk about medicine the way I talk about iron." She stopped. "What do you mean?" she said. He set the hinge down, looked at it, not at her. "Like it's the thing you were made for," he said. "Like it's not separate from you, like it's just what you are." She didn't answer immediately. There was something in the observation that required care, not because it was uncomfortable, because it was accurate in a way that felt exposed. "My mother wanted me to teach school," she said finally. "What did your father want?" he asked. "My father died when I was 9, she said. He didn't want anything after that." A pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "He was a good man," she said. "He would have been proud of this, I think. He was practical. He believed in useful things." She watched Caleb pick the hinge back up. "What about you?" she asked. "The forge. Your father left it to you, but you said you were going to sell it." "I was," he said. "What changed your mind?" He worked the hinge in his hands, tested the action of it, set it back down. "I came back here in November of '67, he said. "Knee was bad, hadn't slept properly in months. The forge was cold, hadn't been fired up in a year since my father died. I was going to spend one night, get the papers together, find a buyer." He paused. "I lit the forge, just to have heat, I told myself. And I stood there watching it come up to temperature, and I felt something go out of me that had been pulling for a long time." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how else to describe it. I stayed because of that one night. Because of what happened in me when the fire came back up." She looked at him. "And the men who didn't retreat at Pharaoh's Ridge?" she asked, quietly, carefully. He went still. "You don't have to," she started. "Their names were Earl Cobb and James Ridley," he said. "Earl was 19. James was 22. I gave the order. They refused it. I carried that order every day since." "You made the right call," she said, "tactically. You set it yourself 8-to-1 indefensible position." "Tactically," he said. "Yes." "Then what are you carrying?" He looked at her then, direct, the way he looked at things when he'd stopped protecting himself from them. "The fact that being right didn't save them," he said. The kitchen was very quiet. She understood that. She understood it from the inside, the specific, unmerciful weight of having done the correct thing and still lost. She had felt it in Creston Falls, felt it every time she ran the logic, and came out the same place you did, what you could with what you had, and it wasn't enough. And being right about that doesn't make it lighter to carry. "I know," she said. "Just that. Not a solution. Not a comfort exactly. Just an acknowledgement." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and picked up the hinge. And she went back to her notes. And the forge went on burning the way it always did, steady and hot and indifferent to the things that happened in front of it. The first real crack appeared 4 days later, and it came from inside the house. Evelyn had been expecting trouble from the town, a second wave from Price or something from Hargrove, or one of the subtler forms of pressure that small communities apply when they've decided they want someone gone. She'd been watching the edges. She hadn't been watching the boy. His name was Danny Marsh, 14 years old. He helped Caleb on Thursdays, and occasional Saturdays ran errands, swept out the forge, did the work that needed doing before the real work started. She'd seen him half a dozen times. He was a quiet kid, the watchful kind, the kind that has learned through some early lesson that staying small is the safest way to move through a world run by adults. She noticed the bruise on his jaw on a Thursday morning. She noticed it the way she noticed everything clinically. First cataloging lateral mandible impact bruise, 2 to 3 days old, not a fall pattern. Then humanly, once the catalog was done, someone had hit this boy in the face. Caleb had seen it too. She could tell from the way he was working, the tension in his shoulders, the controlled precision of his strikes on the anvil, the particular quality of silence that meant he was holding something very deliberately in check. Danny moved around the forge with his usual quiet efficiency, pretending the bruise wasn't there, the way only children who are used to pretending things aren't there can do. Evelyn was there to pick up the horse for the Clara visit. She was pulling on her gloves. She stopped. "Danny," she said. He looked up, a quick, careful look, the kind that checks the room's temperature before committing to an expression. "Yes, ma'am." "Come here a moment." He came. He stood in front of her. Up close, the bruise was worse. There was swelling along the jaw that meant more force than she'd first assessed. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No, ma'am," he said. Automatic. The kind of no that isn't an answer, it's a reflex. "That's not what I asked," she said gently. "I asked if it hurts." He looked at the floor. "Some," he said, quietly. "Who did this?" she asked. Same gentle tone. She had learned over years that the tone mattered more than the question. He didn't answer. She didn't push. She examined the bruise with her hands, checked the jaw for fracture. It was fine, no break, and then she made him look at her. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "But if it happens again, you come here. You understand, day or night. You come here first." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. A kind of bewilderment, the particular expression of a child who has been told something kind and doesn't quite know what to do with it, because it doesn't match the category of things they've learned to expect. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Different this time. Not a reflex. A decision. She let him go. Picked up the horse's lead. And when she passed Caleb at the anvil, she said low enough that Danny couldn't hear, "His father." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Stepfather," he said. She nodded. She rode to Clara's with that information sitting heavy in her chest and thought about it all the way there and all the way back. She thought about what she could do and what she couldn't do, and what the limitations of being a woman with no legal standing in a town that barely tolerated her presence meant for a 14-year-old boy with a stepfather and a bruise. She thought about what Caleb would do. She didn't have to think about that for long. When she got back, Danny was gone for the day, and Caleb was at the far end of the forge doing something she recognized as controlled activity, the kind of work you do when you need your hands occupied so the rest of you stays manageable. "You went to see him," she said. He glanced up. "I had a conversation," he said. "What kind of conversation?" He set the tool down, turned to face her. "The kind where I explained that Danny works for me," he said, "and that I take a personal interest in the condition of my workers. And that if Danny shows up to my forge looking like that again, I'll be taking a more formal interest." She looked at him. And the man understood me," Caleb said. "People generally do when they want to keep their wagon in good repair." She absorbed that. The forge, the leverage, the quiet, practical way he'd applied pressure without making it a scene, without making it Danny's problem to carry afterward. "Is that going to be enough?" she asked. "For now," he said. "I'll watch it." He picked up the tool again. People like that, they choose targets that won't fight back. When they find out something will fight back, they usually look elsewhere. "Usually," she said. "Usually," he agreed. "No promises, just the word as it was." She sat on the barrel by the workbench and pulled out her notes, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the forge went on burning, and outside the late August heat pressed down on Red Hollow Creek with the particular merciless intensity of a summer that has been going on too long and doesn't yet know it. The second twist arrived the way the worst ones do, not announced, not telegraphed, not preceded by any warning that would have allowed for preparation. It was a Sunday evening. The town was quiet in the way Sunday evenings in small western towns are quiet, that particular post-service stillness. People inside with their families, the main road mostly empty. Evelyn and Caleb had eaten dinner together, which had by now become a normal feature of the day rather than a negotiated arrangement. She was clearing plates. He was at the table with the week's accounts, something he did on Sunday evenings, with the focused attention of a man who had learned the hard way what happens when you let the numbers get ahead of you. They heard the bell before they heard the voice. The fire bell. Church roof. A single iron bell that the town had designated for emergencies, and it rang now with the frantic double-strike rhythm that meant not ceremony, but crisis. Then they heard Price's voice outside. Not hostile this time. Not the voice of the man who'd come looking for a fight, a different voice altogether. Urgent. Stripped of everything except the immediate need. "Morgan! Morgan!" Caleb was already at the door. Price was in the road. Behind him, to the south edge of town, An orange glow was climbing into the evening sky that had nothing to do with sunset. "Hannigan's barn," Price said. "It's gone up fast. There's a child." He stopped, his voice caught. "Hannigan's girl. She was in the loft. They can't find her." Caleb was already moving. Evelyn grabbed her bag. "You don't have to," Caleb started. "I'm a nurse, and there may be a child," she said. "Don't waste time." He didn't argue. They ran. The fire had already eaten half the barn by the time they reached it. She felt it before she could see clearly the wall of heat, the way it pressed against exposed skin, the roar of it. A crowd had gathered 20-30 people the whole south end of town, drawn by the bell and the glow, and they stood in a loose arc at the edge of what the fire would allow. The way people stand when there is nothing to be done, and they know it, and cannot make themselves leave. Hannigan, a broad-shouldered farmer she'd seen twice at the market, was being held back by two men. He was making a sound she recognized. She had heard it before in crisis after crisis, and it was the sound a parent makes when they cannot reach their child. Wordless. Animal. The specific agony of a person whose body is trying to do something their mind knows is impossible. "Where was she?" Caleb said to him. "Loft, north side. She was up there with the cats." Hannigan pulled against the men holding him. "She was just up there with the cats. She does it every Sunday." Caleb looked at the barn, calculated. She could see him doing it, reading the fire, reading the structure, reading the places where the frame still held, and the places where it was already gone. "North wall's still up," he said, to himself mostly, then to her. "The loft access is on the north end. If the floor is still intact." "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said, and he went in. She didn't breathe. She had her bag open. She had her hands on what she needed. Burns. Protocol, smoke inhalation. She was moving through it systematically, her training overriding everything else, because if she thought about what was happening instead of what needed to be ready, she would not be useful to anyone. The crowd was silent. That was the thing she remembered later, how completely silent 30 people could become when a single event had all of their attention. 40 seconds. A minute. The north wall shuddered, and she made a sound she hadn't intended to make, and pressed her hands together hard. Caleb came out of the north doorway. He was carrying a girl of about 7. She was coughing violently, desperately, the right kind of cough, the kind that means the lungs are fighting. He was not. He was moving steadily, which meant his legs were fine, but his right arm was pressed against his body at an angle that she read immediately as protective, the instinctive self-guarding of an injury. She reached them first. She took the girl from him. Hannigan was right behind her reaching, and she let him take his daughter and immediately turned her attention to Caleb. "Show me," she said. "It's nothing," he said. "Caleb Morgan, if you say it's nothing, one more time, I will never speak to you again. Show me." He showed her. The right shoulder. Something had hit him, a piece of the burning loft frame. She could see the char mark on his shirt. And when she got the fabric away from the skin, she found a burn that was not nothing. Not the worst she'd seen. Not minor either. The kind that needed immediate treatment and would take weeks to heal properly and would be genuinely agonizing in the interval. She worked fast. She always worked fast in the field, faster than in controlled settings, because field medicine is about buying time, and time does not wait. She cleaned and dressed the burn with what she had in the bag, working by the light of the fire that had by now completely consumed the barn. Moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this in darker places with less. He sat on the ground while she worked. He didn't make a sound, but she could feel through her hands the effort it cost him not to. Around them the crowd had reorganized. People had buckets and were wetting the nearby structures to keep the fire from spreading, and someone had brought water for the girl, and Hannigan was on his knees in the road holding his daughter and crying openly and completely without self-consciousness. "She's breathing well," Evelyn said to Caleb, because she could see him watching the girl. "The cough is good. Her lungs are clearing." He let out a breath. "Good," he said, She tied off the last bandage and sat back on her heels and looked at him. His face was smudged with smoke, his hair was damp with sweat, and he was holding himself with the careful stillness of someone managing significant pain, and he was watching a 7-year-old girl breathe on her father's shoulder with an expression she had never seen on him before. Open, unguarded, the face behind the face. She had the distinct and certain sense that she was seeing something he very rarely let anyone see. She didn't look away. Neither did he when he noticed her watching. "Thank you," she said, quietly, "for the girl, for not dying in there, for being the kind of man who went in." He looked at her. "You had your bag ready," he said. "I always have my bag ready," she said. "I know," he said. And something in the way he said it, not a compliment exactly, just a statement about something he'd observed and valued, landed in her chest with more weight than a compliment would have carried. The town came to the forge the next morning, not as a delegation, not organized. But throughout the course of the day people came. Mrs. Aldine came and brought bread, the same woman who had closed her boarding house door and set it on the porch without knocking. 3 men from the south end of town came to Caleb individually to shake his hand, each one brief, and direct the Western way of expressing something that runs deep without making it theatrical. Hannigan came in the afternoon with his daughter beside him, the girl still coughing occasionally, but upright and bright-eyed, and he stood in front of Caleb with the girl's hand in his and said, "Anything you need, anything at all, for the rest of my life." Caleb said, "Don't leave hay in a closed loft." Hannigan laughed. The raw, overwhelmed laugh of a man who'd nearly lost something irreplaceable and was still finding his way back from it. The girl looked at Evelyn. "Are you the doctor lady?" she asked. "I'm the nurse lady," Evelyn said. "Mr. Morgan said you were the one who fixed his hand," the girl said. "The burned one." "I fix things," Evelyn said. "It's what I do." The girl considered this with the seriousness of a child processing important information. "I want to do that," she said. "When I grow up." Hannigan looked at Evelyn. An apology in it maybe for the town, for the months of cold shoulders, for all of it compressed into one look. Evelyn nodded. "You should," she told the girl. "It's good work." They left. And Evelyn stood in the forge doorway and watched them go. And the thing she felt was not triumph, and not vindication, and not any of the satisfying emotions that this moment might have been expected to produce. What she felt was quieter than that, more settled. The particular feeling of something that has been wrong for a long time, gradually, imperfectly beginning to become right. Caleb came to stand beside her. His arm was in the sling she'd made for him. He was going to be immobilized for at least 2 weeks, which was costing him visibly, not in complaint, because he did not complain, but in the controlled frustration of a man whose entire sense of purpose lived in his hands. "You should rest that arm," she said. "I know," he said. "Are you resting it?" "I'm standing here," he said. "That's resting." "That's standing," she said. "They're different." Evelyn. Caleb. He looked at her sidelong. "You're going to be very difficult about this arm, aren't you?" he said. "I'm going to be medically appropriate about this arm," she said. "Whether that reads as difficult is up to you." She heard him not quite laugh, but the sound adjacent to it. The one she'd catalogued early on as the near vicinity of a smile. She'd heard it more often lately. She'd stopped pretending she didn't notice it. "The 2 weeks for the room," he said. "They're up." She looked at him. She had been aware of this. She had been aware of it for several days, and had been doing what she did with most uncomfortable awareness, keeping it in the peripheral vision, dealing with it when it became unavoidable. "I know," she said. "Clara's not through the worst of it yet," he said. "No," she said. "Another 2, maybe 3 weeks." He was quiet. "And after that," he said. She looked at the road. At Red Hollow Creek. Going about its day, the main road, the people, the ordinary machinery of a small town that had for the past week been reorganizing its understanding of who she was. "I don't know," she said. "Honest. Because it was. He nodded. Like that was a fair answer. The room's yours, he said. For as long as you need it. No terms, no calendar. She turned and looked at him directly. That's not practical, she said. Open-ended arrangements. I told you at the start, he said. I'd let you make your own choice. This is me not forcing one. He met her eyes. Stay as long as you want. Leave when you need to. The door's open either way. She looked at him. Caleb Morgan, who had gone into a burning barn for a child he barely knew, who had faced down a town's judgment without bitterness, who had made coffee every morning for 6 weeks without once making her feel like a burden or a charity case or a temporary problem to be managed, who said hard true things quietly and without decoration, who kept his door unlocked. She felt something she had spent a great deal of energy over the past weeks carefully not feeling. She didn't name it, but she stopped arguing. All right, she said. He turned back toward the forge. She stayed in the doorway looking at the road at the town that was slowly, imperfectly deciding who she was. She thought, I am done planning my escape. She thought, I don't know what that means yet. She thought, I think I'm going to find out. Outside, the late August heat was beginning just barely, almost imperceptibly, to carry the first ghost of something that wasn't summer. Too faint to call autumn. Just a reminder that everything changes. Even the things that feel like they've been going on forever. Red Hollow Creek exhaled. And Evelyn Carter, for the first time in longer than she could measure, breathed all the way in. September came in sideways. Not gently the way people like to remember autumn beginning, all soft light and cooling air, and the comfortable sense of one season giving way to another. It came in with a 3-day windstorm that stripped the leaves before they'd had time to turn properly, and left Red Hollow Creek feeling ambushed, like something had been taken before it was finished. Evelyn noticed and thought, I know that feeling. Clara was nearly well. The fever had not returned in 11 days. She was eating full meals, sleeping through the night, doing light work around the house. 2 weeks ago, Evelyn had stood at Clara's bedside and watched the woman braid her own hair for the first time in months, and the ordinariness of it, the simple private dignity of a woman putting herself back together, had hit her somewhere deep and unguarded. Tom Hughes had stopped leaving honey at the gate. He'd started leaving it at the forge instead. Caleb's shoulder was healing correctly, which Evelyn knew because she examined it every 3 days with the same systematic thoroughness she applied to everything, and because he had, without being asked, actually been resting it not completely. He was incapable of complete stillness, but he had transferred the heavy work to Danny and the boy who spelled him on Saturdays, and he managed the forge from the supervisory position of a man who found delegation genuinely irritating, but had made a pragmatic decision about it. He never said that. He didn't have to. She could read him now the way she read patience. The involuntary signals, the things the body communicates before the mind decides to. That was the thing she'd stopped pretending she didn't notice. That she could read him. That somewhere in the 6 weeks since she'd walked into his forge out of a July heat storm, she had learned his particular language, the way a slight tension in his jaw meant he was choosing his words carefully, the way he went quieter than usual when something was bothering him, the way he refilled her coffee cup without being asked or thanked because it was simply a thing he'd decided to do. She had learned him. And that was not a clinical observation. That was something else entirely. She was thinking about that sitting at the kitchen table on the first proper September morning, the wind finally spent and the air carrying that first real chill when the knock came at the front of the forge. Not the back. Not the informal entrance that regular visitors used, that Danny used, that the Hughes used. The front. The formal knock of someone making a formal call. Caleb looked at her from across the table. She looked back. He went. She heard voices. One she recognized as Caleb's. The other was unfamiliar male, careful the particular cadence of someone who was choosing their words the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. Then Caleb came back through the forge with a man she had never seen. He was in his mid-50s. Well-dressed for Red Hollow Creek, a good coat, a clean hat, boots that had been recently resoled. He carried himself with the particular bearing of someone who is accustomed to having a certain kind of authority, and is currently operating in a context where that authority doesn't fully apply, and he knows it. "Miss Carter," Caleb said. His voice was level. She read that as "be careful." "This is Mr. Philip Drummond. He's come from Creston Falls." The name didn't mean anything to her immediately. The town did. She stood up. "Mr. Drummond," she said, "I don't know you." "No, ma'am," he said, "but you know my employer, Victor Hale." The kitchen went quiet, in the particular way that happens when something you've been braced for arrives, and you find you weren't braced enough. "I see," she said. "Mr. Hale sent me to—" Drummond paused, chose his phrasing with visible care. "To extend an invitation." "An invitation," she repeated. "He'd like to speak with you," Drummond said. "In person. He's willing to come here if you prefer, or to arrange a meeting at a location of your choosing." She looked at Caleb. His face gave her nothing, which meant he was giving her everything, her own space to make this decision, without his reaction influencing it. "What does Victor Hale want to speak with me about?" she asked. Drummond reached inside his coat and produced an envelope. He set it on the table. "He asked me to give you this first," he said, "and to tell you that it wasn't sent lightly." She looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up immediately. She had learned over the course of a life that had required careful navigation that the way you respond to something unexpected is the first thing people use to take your measure. She was not going to let Victor Hale's envelope arriving without warning in her kitchen determine what she did next before she'd had 30 seconds to think. "Thank you, Mr. Drummond," she said. "I'll need some time with this." He nodded. He had the grace to leave without prompting. Caleb showed him out and came back. She was still standing at the table. The envelope was still on it. "You don't have to open it," he said. "I know," she said. "You don't have to meet with him." "I know." She picked up the envelope. Inside was a letter. 2 pages written in a hand she didn't recognize Drummond's, probably because men like Hale dictated. She read it once quickly to get the shape of it. Then she read it again slowly, because the shape of it had been unexpected enough that she needed to confirm she'd understood it correctly. She set it down. "He's withdrawing the complaint," she said. Caleb looked at her. "His formal complaint to the county commissioner," she said. "He wrote to the commissioner 8 months ago, privately separately from the public hearing, a private communication asserting negligence. That's what's been following me. That's what Price's contact in Creston Falls had access to." She looked at the letter. "He says he's withdrawing it." "Why?" Caleb said. She shook her head slowly. Not because she didn't know, but because what she'd read required a moment to become real. "The epidemic took 2 more people in Creston Falls last spring," she said. "After I left. A doctor came through, a proper physician trained in the East, impeccable credentials. Those 2 patients died under his care too." She paused. Victor Hale figured out that he'd been wrong about the cause. The kitchen was very quiet. "He'd been wrong about me," she said, "and 2 more people died while he was busy being wrong." She looked at the letter, at Victor Hale's name at the bottom, or Drummond's approximation of it, and felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not triumph. Not vindication, really, because vindication requires that you'd doubted yourself, and she'd never doubted herself about those deaths. What she felt was more complicated than that. Something that lived between grief and relief, and the particular exhaustion of having been right for too long about something that had cost everyone too much. "He wants to apologize," she said. "In person." "Do you want that?" Caleb said. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what I want from Victor Hale." She looked up. "But I know that letter changes things. That complaint was the document that closed doors. If it's withdrawn—" "You could go back," Caleb said. The words landed in the kitchen differently than either of them expected. She heard something in them that she didn't think he'd intended to put there. Or maybe he had. She couldn't tell. His face was doing the thing it did when he was holding very still inside, composed on the surface, working hard underneath. I could go back, she said carefully. Or I could go somewhere else. The complaint was the thing that made everywhere feel like Creston Falls. She paused. Now it isn't. He nodded once, said nothing. She folded the letter, put it back in the envelope. I'm not going anywhere yet, she said. Clara isn't finished. All right, he said. But something had changed in the air of the kitchen, and they both knew it, and neither of them addressed it directly, because that was how they both handled the things that mattered most, with the careful indirection of two people who had been hurt enough to know that saying a thing out loud gives it edges that can cut. She wrote back to Drummond that evening. She would meet with Victor Hale. Not now. When she was ready, she would let him know. She did not tell Caleb what she'd decided until she'd sealed the letter. When she did, he was at the workbench. He listened without turning around. That's your call, he said. I know it is, she said. I'm telling you because... She stopped. She was about to say something that she hadn't planned. She adjusted. Because you've been part of this, whether you asked to be or not. He set down the tool he was holding, turned around. Evelyn, he said. Something in the way he said it, the same way he'd said it weeks ago. First name direct, the moment that had stopped her the first time, stopped her now. Don't, she said. Quietly, not harshly. He looked at her. Don't what, he said. Don't say something we can't unsay, she said. Not yet. Not while I don't know what I'm deciding. A long pause. All right, he said. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay on the cot, narrow familiar now in all its imperfections, and looked at the ceiling and thought about the difference between a door that's been opened and a door you've chosen to walk through. They looked the same from the outside. They felt completely different from the inside. The crisis with Danny came 2 mornings later, and it announced itself the way crises always do when you've been looking the wrong direction suddenly and without mercy. He came to the forge before dawn. She heard him at the back door, a specific knock, the one he used 3 quick and 1 slow, and she was up and moving before she was fully awake because she'd told him day or night and she'd meant it. She opened the door. His left eye was swollen shut. Not a bruise this time. A full impact wound, the kind of swelling that closes an eye completely and means the bone behind it has been stressed hard enough to question whether it's intact. She pulled him inside without a word. She sat him at the kitchen table. She lit the lamp. She examined the eye with the focused economy of movement she used when she was suppressing her own reaction in order to be useful. The bone was not fractured. She could tell by pressure response and pupil reaction. But the tissue damage was serious, and the blow had been recent enough that there was still heat in it. How long ago? She asked. Couple hours, he said. His voice was careful. The voice of someone trying to hold themselves together through the specific dignity of not falling apart. Your stepfather. Not a question. He came home drunk, Danny said. I said something I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve this for anything you said, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. Clinical steadiness, the kind that's a choice and not an absence of feeling. Do you understand that? He didn't answer. Danny. Yes, ma'am, he said, still careful, still holding. Do you understand that? A pause that lasted too long. I'm trying to, he said. She finished examining the eye. She got ice from the block in the cellar, wrapped it in cloth, pressed it into his hands to hold against his face. Then she went and knocked on Caleb's door. He opened it in under 5 seconds, which told her he'd already been awake. He took one look at her face, looked past her at Danny, sitting at the table, and his entire expression went through several things in rapid succession, all of them controlled, all of them visible to her because she could read him now. His eye isn't fractured, she said quietly. But Caleb, I know, he said. Last time you talked to him. This time, I know, he said again. Different. Settled in a way that meant he'd already decided what happened next. What are you going to do? She asked. He looked at Danny, at the ice cloth pressed against the boy's swollen eye. at the specific posture of a 14-year-old boy sitting at a kitchen table at 3 in the morning, trying to maintain his dignity through something that should never have required him to have any. "I'm going to go get the sheriff," he said. "The sheriff here has never—" "I know what the sheriff here has never done," Caleb said. "I'm going anyway." She looked at him. "And if he won't act?" she asked. "Then we'll talk to Judge Colburn," he said. "He rides circuit through here in October. I know Colburn. We served in the same unit for a year." He paused. "There are things I can do, Evelyn. I haven't done them because Danny's mother is still in that house, and moving too hard too fast can make things worse before it makes them better. But this—" He looked at Danny again. "This is done being a situation I manage quietly." She held his gaze. He was right. She knew it. She'd known it since the first bruise, but she'd been deferring to his judgment about timing and approach because he knew the town and she didn't. He knew the people. But her own judgment, the clinical one, said that escalating injury meant escalating danger, and clinical judgment did not care about timing. "Go," she said. He went. She sat with Danny at the kitchen table. She made him tea. He probably wouldn't drink, and put it in front of him anyway. And she sat across from him the same way she'd sat across from Clara at eye level present, not requiring anything. "He's going to get the sheriff," Danny said. "Yes." "My mother's going to—" He stopped. "What's your mother going to do?" she asked. He looked at the ice cloth in his hands. "She's going to say it wasn't that bad," he said. Flat, not a complaint. Just information delivered by someone who has processed this particular information many times. She always does. She's not trying to protect him. I know that. She's scared of what happens if she doesn't. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. That's the hardest part of this kind of situation to understand from the outside. It looks like a choice she's making, but fear doesn't feel like a choice when you're inside it. He looked at her. "How do you know?" he asked. She thought about Creston Falls, about the 6 weeks of walking, about the way she'd 6 weeks of walking, about the way she'd kept her bag packed and her plans contingent and one eye always on the next town north, because moving felt like agency and staying felt like surrender. "Because I've been afraid of the wrong things," she said. "And it took me a long time to figure out which things were worth being afraid of and which things I was using fear to avoid." He was quiet, processing. He was a thoughtful kid. She'd known that from the first week from the quality of his watching. "Miss Carter," he said, "are you going to leave when Clara's better?" The question landed with the directness that only children can achieve without meaning to be brutal. "I don't know," she said, honest. Because he'd asked honestly, and he deserved the same back. "Mr. Morgan wants you to stay," he said. She looked at him. "Danny, I'm not saying it to be, I'm just saying it because it's true," he said. "I work with him every day. I can tell." He looked at the ice cloth. "He doesn't talk much, but when you're not here, the forge is different." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Different how?" she asked. "Quieter," he said, "but the wrong kind of quiet." Caleb came back with the sheriff an hour later. Sheriff Beaumont was a tired-looking man of 60 who wore his office with the weary competence of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have lost his enthusiasm for it, but not his thoroughness. He looked at Danny's eye. He asked Danny specific questions which Danny answered haltingly at first, then with more steadiness, as it became clear the questions were going somewhere rather than nowhere. The stepfather's name was Roland Marsh. He'd had 2 prior complaints, one from a neighbor, one from the previous school teacher, both of which had been noted and filed and gone nowhere. "This one's not going nowhere," Beaumont said. He said it the way Caleb said things, flat, no decoration, just the statement. He left to get Roland Marsh. Caleb sat down at the table across from Danny. He folded his hands, the burned one, and the unbandaged one, now the shoulder healing, into its sling. He looked at the boy for a moment. "You did right coming here," he said. Danny looked at him. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Here is where you go," Caleb said. "Whatever time, Whatever the situation, you come here." He said it the same way Evelyn had said it weeks ago, and she heard the echo of her own words in his, and something moved through her that she couldn't have named and didn't try to. "What about my mother?" Danny asked. "We're going to work on that," Caleb said. "Not tonight, but we're going to work on it." "How?" "One thing at a time," Caleb said. "Tonight, the one thing is making sure you're safe. Tomorrow is a different problem." Danny looked at the table. "I'm scared," he said, quietly, with the specific courage it takes a 14-year-old boy to admit fear to an adult he respects. "I know," Caleb said. "That's all right." "You're never scared," Danny said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared all the time," he said. "I've just had longer to get used to it." Danny looked up at him. Caleb held the boy's gaze steadily. Not performing steadiness, just steady. The real kind that comes from having been through the worst of things and found out you survived it. Evelyn watched them from across the table and felt something clarify inside her. Not a decision, not yet, not the full shape of one, but the beginning of clarity. The moment when you realize you've been asking the wrong question. Not whether to stay or go. Whether you're willing to be part of something. Whether you're willing to let something be part of you. The town found out about Roland Marsh by noon. Not because anyone announced it, no one did, but because sheriff's business in a small town travels on its own. By midday, there were conversations happening in the general store, and outside the church, and at the water pump on the East Road. And by late afternoon, Evelyn could feel walking through town to pick up a supply order that something had shifted again. Not toward her this time. The shift wasn't about her. But she was adjacent to it, connected to it. She was the one who'd opened the door at 3 a.m, and Caleb was the one who'd gone for Beaumont. And those two things were now part of the town's accounting of events. Price found her on the main road. She steeled herself instinctively. They hadn't spoken since the confrontation at the forge. He'd nodded to her twice in public since then, brief, contained the acknowledgement of a man who isn't ready to say he was wrong, but has stopped actively being wrong, and she'd nodded back and left it at that. He fell into step beside her, not confrontationally, just present, walking the same direction. "Morgan went to Beaumont this morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "For the Marsh boy." "Yes." A pause. "I've known Roland Marsh is a problem for 2 years," Price said. "I said something to Beaumont. Once. It went nowhere." He paused. "Morgan did what I didn't do a second time." She looked at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead. "I'm not saying this to... I'm not after anything," he said gruffly. "I'm just saying it. Morgan went further than I did." She was quiet for a moment. "You went to Beaumont," she said. "That was something." "It wasn't enough." "No," she said. "It wasn't. But you went." She paused. "Price, what happened to your wife?" "I know," he said, cutting her off, but not harshly. "I know I put that on you wrong. I know you're not that man." He said it without looking at her. Like looking at her while he said it would cost more than he could manage right now. "I'm not good at..." "I know," she said, saving him the end of the sentence. They walked in silence for half a block. "What was her name?" Evelyn asked. He stopped. She stopped too. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. The thing that moves across a person's face when they realize they've been carrying something that no one has ever asked to share. "Margaret," he said. "I'm sorry about Margaret," Evelyn said. Just that. No elaboration, no performance of sympathy, just the statement delivered like something true. His jaw worked. He nodded. Once. Then kept walking. She kept walking too. In the opposite direction toward the supply shop. She thought about the difference between forgiving someone and releasing what they did. She thought about Margaret Price and Victor Hale and the 3 patients in Creston Falls and Earl Cobb and James Ridley. and a cold forge in November of 1867, and a boy with a swollen eye sitting at a kitchen table at 3 in the morning. She thought about the weight of the things people carry, and the way they sometimes put those things down in the wrong place, on the wrong person, and how that was not a defense, and not an excuse, but was also not the whole of who they were. She thought, I am so tired of carrying other people's fear. She thought, I think I'm ready to stop. Caleb was alone in the kitchen when she got back. Danny was at the sheriff's office giving a formal statement with Beaumont, and wouldn't be back until evening. The forge was quiet. He'd given the Saturday boy the day, and closed the public side of the operation. He was at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was looking at it rather than drinking it, which meant he was somewhere inside his own head, rather than actually in the kitchen. She came in, put her bag down, sat across from him. He looked up. "Drummond's still in town," she said. "He's waiting for an answer about the meeting with Hale." "I know," he said. "I'm going to meet with him," she said. "Hale, I've decided." He nodded. "When?" he said. "He's willing to come here, to Red Hollow Creek." She paused. "I think I want him to come here. I think I want to have this conversation somewhere that's—" She stopped. Found the right word. "Mine." He looked at her. "Is it?" he said. Quietly. Not a challenge. A genuine question. She held his gaze. "Caleb," she said. "I'm not pushing," he said. "I told you I wouldn't push. I'm asking." She looked at the table, at her hands on it, at the medical bag by the door, which had been in the same spot for a month now, and had stopped looking like something she was keeping ready to grab. "Danny said something last night," she said. "He asked if I was going to leave." Caleb was very still. "What did you tell him?" he said. "I told him I didn't know," she said. "That was the truth at the time." He said nothing. "At the time," she said again. Something shifted in his face, the careful composition of it. She watched him let something through that he'd been holding back for she wasn't certain how long. Long enough that it had built up behind whatever he used to contain it. "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said. "You don't know what I was going to—" "I know," she said again. "I know because I've been not saying the same thing for the same amount of time." She looked at him directly. No looking away. She was done looking away. "I came here with nothing. $2.30 and a name that didn't work anywhere and nowhere to sleep through a storm. You opened a door." "That wasn't—" he started. "Let me finish," she said. He closed his mouth. "You opened a door, and you never put conditions on it, and you never made me feel like a debt or a charity case, or a woman who had to earn her right to exist here. You just—" She paused. "You just made coffee, and asked if I'd eaten, and told me the truth about yourself when I asked for it, and went into a burning barn." She stopped. "I have been afraid of what that means, because the last time I let somewhere become home, it burned down around me, and I had to walk 300 miles to find the next breath." He didn't move. "I don't want to walk away from this," she said. I want to decide to be here. Not because Clara needs me, or because Drummond's in town, or because I haven't figured out the next move yet. Because I choose it." She looked at him. "Because I choose you." The kitchen was quiet. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, the burned hand, the scarred one. He put it over hers with the careful deliberateness of a man who has decided to do something and is doing it all the way. "I've been trying not to make it harder for you to leave," he said, "in case that was what you needed." "I know," she said. "It's been—" He stopped. "It's been the hardest thing I've done in a long time." She turned her hand over under his, held it. "I know that too," she said. Outside September settled over Red Hollow Creek. The first real autumn afternoon, cool, clear, the light different in the way it only gets when summer has finally admitted it's done. Inside the kitchen, two people who had each come to this town carrying too much sat at a table with their hands together and breathed. Not everything was resolved. Roland Marsh was still a problem being worked through the sheriff's office. Victor Hale was still in Creston Falls waiting for an answer. The town was still the town, imperfect, gossiping, slowly changing in the particular way that towns change, which is too slowly to be satisfying and just fast enough to be real. But something had ended that had been going on for too long. And something else quieter, more careful, more certain had begun. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Neither of them needed to. Victor Hale arrived on a Thursday. Evelyn knew he was coming. She'd sent word through Drummond 3 days prior, short and direct, the way she handled things, now that she'd stopped padding her communications with the careful diplomatic distance she used to use when she was afraid of taking up too much space. She'd named the day, and the time, and the place, which was the Forge, because she'd meant what she said about wanting this conversation somewhere that was hers, and she'd stopped qualifying that claim in her own head somewhere around the same time she'd taken Caleb's hand across the kitchen table. She hadn't told many people he was coming. Caleb knew. Clara knew because Clara had become the kind of person she told things to. The friendship had developed sideways and quietly, the way the best ones do through the accumulation of Thursday visits and direct conversations, and the particular bond that forms between a woman who saves your life and the woman whose life gets saved. Tom Hughes knew because Tom Hughes knew everything that happened to Clara within approximately 4 hours of it happening, which Evelyn had decided was one of the most genuinely romantic things she'd ever observed. Danny knew because Danny was at the Forge every Thursday and had developed in the week since the sheriff's visit, the specific alertness of a kid who has been through something and come out the other side and is now paying attention to the world with the heightened awareness of someone who has learned that paying attention matters. Roland Marsh was no longer a feature of Danny's daily life. Beaumont had moved on the formal complaint. Judge Colburn, who did in fact know Caleb from the war, and who turned out to be a precise and unsentimental man with a strong opinion about men who hit children, had passed through Red Hollow Creek 2 weeks ahead of his usual circuit schedule in what everyone understood was not a coincidence. Roland Marsh had been given a choice that wasn't much of a choice. He'd left town by the end of that week. Danny's mother, whose name was Ruth, had cried for 2 days after he left. Not because she missed him, or not only because of that, because human hearts are not simple things, and Evelyn had stopped expecting them to be. She cried because fear, when it finally lifts, leaves a space behind it that grief comes to fill before relief can get there. Evelyn had sat with Ruth twice during those 2 days. She hadn't said much. She'd learned through years of sitting with people in the hard moments that presence is usually more useful than words and almost always more honest. Ruth was doing better now. She'd taken in 2 Borders women from the mining operation that had opened 10 miles north, and the income had changed the arithmetic of her daily life in ways that changed other things downstream. She still looked fragile some mornings, but she was standing in her own doorway instead of behind someone else's, and Evelyn had learned to recognize that as the beginning of something real. So that was the state of Red Hollow Creek on the Thursday morning. Victor Hale stepped off the stage from Creston Falls and walked into Caleb Morgan's Forge. Evelyn was ready. She had spent 3 days deciding what ready meant in this context. She'd gone through the anger she'd had plenty of that had been carrying it for 8 months, and through the practiced calm she used professionally, and through several conversations with Clara that had clarified things considerably, and she'd arrived somewhere that wasn't either of those. Somewhere steadier. The place you get to when you've processed something enough to know what you actually think about it rather than what you feel about it in the acute phase. She stood in the kitchen doorway when Drummond brought him through. Caleb was at the workbench behind her, visible but not intruding, present in the way he was present for things that mattered to her, which was close enough to matter and far enough to give her room. Victor Hale was 63 years old. She'd never seen him before. All of her dealings with the aftermath of his complaint had been through intermediaries and documents. He was a big man, heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had probably once been commanding and had gone complicated with age. And she could see it. She was trained to read faces' grief, real grief, the kind that doesn't resolve, only redistributes. He took off his hat when he saw her. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She sat across from him. Drummond stayed near the forge door. Caleb stayed at the workbench. Hale looked at the table for a moment, then at her. "I don't know how to start this," he said. "Start with what you came to say," she said. "We can work from there." He nodded. He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she recognized as the physical displacement of emotion, the thing people do when they need their hands occupied so the rest of them can function. "My nephew's name was Thomas," he said. "He was 26. He worked in my store for 4 years. He was going to take it over eventually." He paused. "When he died when the fever took him, I needed it to be someone's fault. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Then it just felt like justice." She said nothing. "I wrote that complaint to the commissioner because I needed to have done something," he said. "Because doing nothing felt like accepting that Thomas died for no reason, and I couldn't accept that." He looked at her. "I know that's not an explanation. I know it's not close to an excuse." "No," she said. "It's not." He flinched slightly. He'd probably been hoping she would offer him something there. She didn't. "You destroyed 8 months of my life," she said. "It came out level. Not with the heat it would have carried 2 months ago. Just the fact of it delivered as a fact. I had 6 years of work. A reputation I'd built carefully in a field that doesn't give women the benefit of the doubt to begin with. I had a practice and a home and people who trusted me with their lives. Your complaint, not the public hearing, which cleared me, but your private letter to the commissioner. That letter is what followed me. That's the document that closed doors." "I know," he said. "People could have died," she said. "There were people I couldn't treat because I had no standing. Because every town I came to that letter was ahead of me." "I know," he said again. His voice was rough. "Did anyone die?" she asked. "In the towns you don't know about, between Creston Falls and here, did anyone not get care they needed because the woman who could have given it to them had no standing to practice?" He looked at her. "I don't know," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "And that's the part I have to live with, not knowing." The kitchen was very quiet. "The withdrawal of the complaint," she said. "That's formal. Filed with the commissioner's office." "Signed and delivered 2 weeks ago," Drummond said from the doorway. "I have the confirmation document if you want to see it." "I want to see it," she said. He produced it. She read it. It was what it claimed to be: complete, formal, properly executed. She folded it and set it in front of her. "All right," she said. Hale looked at her. "Is there?" he started. "I'm not going to tell you you're forgiven," she said. "Because I don't think that's what this is. I don't think you came here for absolution. I think you came here because you needed to look at what you did and stop looking away from it, and I think you've earned the right to do that." She paused. "Thomas deserved to be mourned. He didn't deserve to be weaponized. There's a difference, and I think you know that now." His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, which he was managing with the rigid self-control of a man of his generation, for whom that kind of visibility cost everything. "I'm sorry," he said. Just that. No elaboration. Just the statement, the way she'd said Margaret's name to Price, plain without performance. She looked at him. "I know you are," she said. She stood up, extended her hand. He looked at it. Then he stood and shook it, brief, firm, the Western way. The way of people who don't have better words and know it. He left with Drummond 20 minutes later. Evelyn stood at the kitchen table with the confirmation document in her hands and felt the 8 months of it, the walking the doors, the accusations, the contingency plans, and the packed bags, and the careful performance of someone who has learned to need very little so that losing things hurts less. She felt all of it shift, not disappear. It didn't disappear. But it moved from the front of her chest, where it had been pressing for 8 months, to somewhere further back. The past where it belonged. She heard Caleb come up behind her. He didn't touch her, just stood there, present. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. Then no. Then both. "That makes sense," he said. She turned around. He was closer than he usually stood, the careful distance he maintained unless she initiated something different. She looked at him. "I want to practice here," she said. He looked at her steadily. "In Red Hollow Creek," she said. "Formally, I want to establish a proper practice. Not just Clara, not just whoever Caleb Morgan vouches for, an actual practice open to anyone who needs it." She held up the confirmation document. "This clears the last obstacle. I can approach the county medical board now. I can write to the licensing office in the territorial capital." She paused. "I want to build something here." He held her gaze. "This is a small town," he said. "Dr. Pullman's entrenched." "Dr. Pullman's incompetent," she said. "He nearly killed Clara. People here deserve better." "Pullman's not going to go quietly," he said. "I know," she said. "I didn't say I was going to ask him to." Something moved in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile, the real thing, or close to it. "You're going to fight him," he said. "I'm going to do my job," she said. "He can respond to that however he likes." He looked at her for a long moment. "I have some money set aside," he said, "from the years when I had no reason to spend on anything. If you need a proper space, a room at the front of the house, or a building on the adjacent lot, the land's mine." "Caleb, I'm not giving it to you," he said. "I'm offering to invest in a medical practice in Red Hollow Creek. Those are different things." She looked at him. "You said that about staying the first time," she said. "The distinction between staying and living here." "I did," he said. "You make a lot of distinctions," she said. "I've found they matter," he said. She looked at the document in her hands. At the forge behind him, the anvil and the fire and the 10 years of his father's work and his own work built on top of it. This place, that had been the end of his running, and was now, she understood, the beginning of something she was choosing on her own terms. "All right," she said. "Investment. I'll draw up terms." "Of course you will," he said. She almost laughed. She felt it in her chest, the unfamiliar pressure of it, the way real laughter lives in the same neighborhood as tears when you've been holding a lot for a long time. "Caleb," she said. "Evelyn," he said. She stepped forward. She put her hand against his chest, flat, deliberate, not tentative. His heart was beating fast. She could feel it. That told her more than any words he'd said or not said. He put his hand over hers. The burned one. The scarred one. His hand over hers the way it had been across the kitchen table, except this time there was no table between them, and no uncertainty on either side about what this was. "I'm staying," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm not staying because I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. "I have somewhere else to go now. I have the document. I have my standing back. I could go back to Creston Falls, or go to San Francisco, or go anywhere." She looked at him. "I'm staying because this is where I want to be." He brought his other hand up and cupped her face with the careful deliberateness of a man who is doing something that matters and knows it. "Evelyn Carter," he said. "Caleb Morgan," she said. He kissed her. Not a dramatic, explosive thing. Not the kind that exists in stories told by people who've never actually been through something hard together. It was quiet. It was certain. It was the kiss of two people who have been moving toward each other for months through fire and accusation and winter storms of other people's making, and have finally arrived. When they separated, she stayed close. He kept his hand against her face. "That took long enough," Danny said from the forge doorway. They both turned. He was standing there with a broom he'd clearly forgotten he was holding, looking at them with the particular expression of a 14-year-old who has been watching two adults fail to say the obvious thing for weeks and has finally been vindicated. Caleb looked at him. "Get back to work," he said. "Yes, sir," Danny said. He was already grinning. He disappeared back into the forge, and they heard him start sweeping with entirely too much enthusiasm. Evelyn pressed her face briefly against Caleb's shoulder. Not to hide. She didn't hide anymore. She'd decided she was done with that, but because she wanted to. Because she could. He put his arm around her and said nothing, which was the right thing. October came in clean and honest. The way October sometimes does in the mountains, sharp and clear. The sky a particular shade of blue that only appears after summer has fully released its hold. The aspens on the ridge above town had gone gold overnight, or so it seemed, the way color changes do when you haven't been watching for it, and then suddenly it's there. Evelyn wrote 12 letters in the first 2 weeks of October. To the Territorial Medical Licensing Board. To 2 county commissioners, whose names Clara had identified as reasonable men. To a nurse she'd trained alongside named Helen Marsh, no relation to Roland, who had written to her twice since Creston Falls, and whom she'd been too afraid to answer until now. To Dr. Fitch, the letter she'd never sent, finally sent with all the things in it she'd been carrying for 8 months. To a medical supply company in St. Louis, whose catalog she'd been studying for 3 weeks. Fitch wrote back within 10 days. His letter was 2 pages long and characteristically precise. He was not a sentimental man, never had been. But in the last paragraph he said, "I always knew you would find somewhere to land. I am glad it was somewhere you chose, and not somewhere that merely tolerated you." That distinction matters in this work. She read that paragraph 3 times. Then she put the letter in the drawer of the desk that had appeared in the back room 2 weeks ago. Caleb had built it without announcing he was going to, and placed it there on a Tuesday morning while she was at Clara's. And she had come back to find it there, with an inkwell and a lamp already on it, and she had stood in the doorway for a full minute before she could move. She had not made a thing of it. She had made dinner instead, which was the language they'd developed, the practical, careful daily language of 2 people building something without making speeches about the building. The room at the front of the house, the one Caleb had proposed as the practice space, was being cleared and fitted. He worked on it in the evenings, moving slowly, because his shoulder was still not at full capacity, and she watched him like a hawk and redirected him the moment he exceeded what she considered acceptable strain. He tolerated this, with what she had come to understand was his version of affection, a particular brand of not arguing that was different from agreement and different from submission and specific to her. Danny helped. He had become a fixture of the place in a way that had organized itself naturally, rather than being arranged. He was there most days, helping with the forge in the morning, and increasingly helping with the practice preparations in the afternoon, carrying lumber and paint, and the specific supplies that Evelyn specified with the efficiency she applied to everything. He was good with his hands. Caleb had started teaching him the basics of smithing, not as a child learning a trade, but as someone being invited into a craft. Ruth came by twice. She was tentative the first time, standing at the front door with a pie she'd made and an expression that said she wasn't sure of her reception. Evelyn had opened the door wide and taken the pie and said, "Thank you, come in." And that had been the end of Ruth's tentativeness. Clara declared herself fully recovered in the middle of October, which Evelyn confirmed clinically and celebrated with a dinner at the Hughes house that turned into an evening that lasted until nearly midnight. The 4 of them, Clara and Tom and Evelyn and Caleb, around the Hughes kitchen table, telling stories that got longer and more embellished as the evening went on, the specific kind of storytelling that happens among people who have been through something together and are now far enough from it to find the shape of it. Tom told the story of the first Thursday Evelyn had come to the house from his perspective, which Evelyn hadn't heard before, and which involved considerably more terror on his part than she'd understood at the time. "I opened the door, and she said she was a nurse, and Caleb sent her," Tom said. "And I thought Caleb Morgan, who doesn't speak to anyone and hasn't looked comfortable in a room with another human being since 1869, sent a woman to my house. I thought she was a ghost." "You let the ghost in," Clara said. "You told me to go make coffee," Tom said. "Because I could see she was real, and she knew what she was doing, and you were in the way," Clara said. Caleb looked at Evelyn across the table. She looked back. The second twist, the one she hadn't seen coming, even after everything arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, in the 3rd week of October. Dr. Pullman came to the forge. Not with Hargrove. Not with a delegation. Alone. He knocked at the front, which nobody did anymore, and Caleb showed him through, and he came into the kitchen where Evelyn was reviewing the supply list for the practice with the air of a man who had made a decision that cost him something. He was 58. She'd seen him twice from a distance and formed opinions that she acknowledged might be colored by Clara's experience. Up close, he was smaller than she'd expected, not physically, but in the particular way of people whose power is tied to a specific context. Outside that context, they're just men. "Miss Carter," he said. "Dr. Pullman," she said. She didn't stand. Not rudeness, she just didn't perform deference she didn't feel. He sat without being invited, which she noted. "I hear you're setting up a practice," he said. "You've heard correctly," she said. "This town has a doctor," he said. "This town has you," she said. "Those may or may not be the same thing. I intend to let people decide." He looked at her steadily. "That's a challenge," he said. "It's a statement of intent," she said. "A challenge implies I'm interested in fighting you. I'm interested in treating patients. If you do your job well, we'll have different patients. If you don't," she paused, "then the town will notice." A silence. He looked at the supply list on the table. "You're formally licensed," he said. "My licensing was never revoked," she said. "It was clouded by a complaint that has since been formally withdrawn. I have the documentation." He was quiet. "Clara Hughes," he said. She waited. "I know what happened with Clara Hughes," he said. "The delivery." He said it stiffly, the way men say things they've been composing and recomposing for a while. "I know it wasn't handled correctly. I know—" He stopped. "What do you know, Dr. Pullman?" she said. Not unkindly, with the direct interest of someone who genuinely wants the answer. He looked at the table. "I know I've been practicing alone in this town for 12 years, he said, "with no one to review my work, no colleagues, no oversight." He paused. A man can go wrong without knowing he's going wrong when there's no one to tell him. She looked at him. This was not what she'd expected. "Are you asking me to review your work?" she said carefully. "I don't know what I'm asking," he said. "I came here because—" He stopped again, started over. "I came here because my wife told me I had to, because Genevieve said that if I let this play out as a fight, I'd be the one who lost, and she's been right about things before." He looked up. "And because what happened with Clara Hughes has been sitting with me for 8 months, and I didn't know how to—" He didn't finish that sentence either. She looked at him for a long time. "You could have killed her," she said. "I know," he said. "You nearly did." "I know that too." "And other patients," she said. "Before Clara, how many cases have there been where the outcome was acceptable enough that no one pushed back but the standard of care was—" "I don't know," he said. "That's the honest answer. I don't know." She looked at the supply list, at the room being built at the front of the house, at the 12 letters she'd written, and the practice she was building, and the thing she'd decided to do here. She thought about what it meant to practice medicine in a small town alone. She thought about Dr. Fitch, who had reviewed her work constantly, who had been stringent and demanding, and sometimes unkind about it, and who had made her a better practitioner than she would have been without that pressure. She thought about 12 years of no oversight, about how any of them would go wrong in those conditions given enough time. She wasn't softening toward him. This was not a softening. This was a clinical assessment. "I'll work independently," she said. "I won't work under you, and I won't be subordinate to you in any professional capacity. Is that clear?" "Yes," he said. "But if you want to present cases, complicated cases, things you're uncertain about, I'll look at them," she said, "professionally, as a colleague." She paused. "And if I find a pattern of harm in your practice, I'll report it to the licensing board. That's not a threat. That's what responsible practitioners do." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not gratitude exactly. Not relief. The specific expression of a man who has been sitting with a problem alone for a very long time, and has just been told he doesn't have to sit with it alone anymore, which is both better and harder than he expected it to be. "All right," he said. He stood, put his hat on. "Your terms," he said. "My terms," she said. He left. Caleb came in from the forge 30 seconds later. "How much of that did you hear?" she said. "Enough," he said. She looked at the supply list. Did I just... She paused. I may have just made a working arrangement with the man who nearly killed Clara Hughes. You made an arrangement that gives you oversight of his practice, Caleb said. That protects future patients. Yes, she said. That's the correct way to think about it. Then think about it that way, he said. She looked up at him. You're very practical, she said. You've mentioned that, he said. I mean it as a compliment, she said. I know, he said. The practice opened in November. Not with fanfare, she wasn't interested in fanfare, and the town wasn't quite ready for it anyway, and they both understood that things that last are built without announcing themselves too loudly. She put a sign on the front room door. Evelyn Carter, nurse practitioner, medical care, daily. 8 to 5 emergencies, any hour. The first patient was Hannigan's daughter, the girl who'd asked if she could be a nurse lady when she grew up. She came with a cut on her palm from a fence wire her father behind her, and she sat on the examination table with her legs swinging and watched Evelyn clean and dress the wound with the focused attention of a 7-year-old who has decided this is important. Does it hurt? Evelyn asked. Some, the girl said. But it's okay. Good girl, Evelyn said. The girl looked at the room, at the organized shelves of supplies, at the examination table and the anatomy diagram on the wall that Clara had helped her hang straight, and the small wood stove that kept the room warm. I like it here, the girl said. Me too, Evelyn said. Hannigan looked at her over his daughter's head. The same look he'd given her the day after the fire, the compressed, inadequate look of a man who has too much to say and not enough words for it. She nodded. He nodded back. After they left, she sat in the practice room for a few minutes alone. She looked at what she'd built. It wasn't large. It wasn't the practice she'd had in Creston Falls that had been 6 years of accumulation, and she wasn't starting over, she was starting differently, which was a distinction that mattered. This was the first day of something. The first day of a thing she'd chosen with her eyes open in a place she'd chosen with a life she'd built rather than survived. Caleb knocked at the open door. She looked up. He had 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the desk beside her, looked at the room, at the sign on the door. How do you feel? He said. She thought about it honestly. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said, which is something I haven't felt in a very long time. He looked at her. Good, he said. Just that. She picked up the coffee. He leaned against the doorframe, not quite in the room, not quite out of it. The threshold. She looked at him there and thought about all the thresholds she'd stood at in the last year. All the doors that had been closed and the one that hadn't. The one that had stayed open and kept staying open, and the man who'd left it that way without making a condition of it. Caleb, she said. Evelyn, he said. Come in, she said. He came in. He pulled the chair from the corner, the same motion she'd made at Clara's bedside that first Thursday chair to beside the patient eye level present, and sat across from her desk. His shoulder was nearly healed. He was working full days at the forge again, which he'd taken to with the relief of a man restored to his purpose. He still let her check the wound every 3 days, which she was fairly certain he no longer needed medically, but which had become something else between them, a ritual, a tenderness. The small ongoing act of letting yourself be cared for when you've spent a long time not doing that. Danny asked me something this morning, he said. What did he ask? He asked if he could stay here, Caleb said. Not just work here, stay. He asked if we'd... He paused. He was trying to find the right word for it. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. Evelyn set her cup down. What did you tell him? She said. I told him I'd ask you, he said. She looked at him. He doesn't have to ask, she said. This is his home if he wants it. Caleb held her gaze. Something moved in his face, the thing she'd learned to watch for the thing behind the thing, the face that lived underneath the composed one. I told him I thought you'd say that, he said. Then why did you ask? Because it's your home too, he said. And decisions like that are made together. She looked at him, at Caleb Morgan, who had come back from a war he'd lost, carrying the names of two men who hadn't come back with him and built a life from a cold forge and a winter's worth of stubborn refusal to run anymore. Who made coffee every morning and kept the door unlocked and said hard, true things without decoration, and went into burning buildings and held the hands of frightened boys and made room for her without making her feel like a debt. Who asked instead of decided. Who said together like it was just the natural word. Together, she said. He nodded. Together, he agreed. Outside November settled over Red Hollow Creek. The forge fire burned. The practice sign was visible from the main road, and two women she recognized from the market had stopped to read it as she watched from the window, and one of them had pointed at something on it and turned to say something to the other, and it might have been gossip, and it might have been interest, and it might have been both, but it was the kind of both she could live with, the kind that meant she was real and present and staying. Danny came in through the forge at midday and knocked at the practice door and said, "Caleb says lunch," with the specific familiarity of someone who has started to act like they live somewhere before they've fully admitted it to themselves. "Tell him 5 minutes," Evelyn said. "He said you'd say that," Danny said. "Then why did he send you?" Danny grinned. "Because he likes it when you show up," he said. "Even 5 minutes late." He disappeared back into the forge. Evelyn sat alone in the practice room for one more minute. She looked at the sign on the door, at the shelves of supplies, at the anatomy diagram, hanging straight, because Clara had made her rehang it twice. She looked at the small wood stove and the desk Caleb had built without telling her he was going to, and the coffee cup beside her that he'd set there because he paid attention to what she needed and acted on it without ceremony. She thought, 8 months ago, I walked 300 miles because there was nowhere left to stand. She thought, this is where I stand now. She picked up her coat, walked through the door. Caleb was in the kitchen with 3 plates and an expression that meant he'd been waiting patiently and was not going to say so. Danny was already seated halfway through his bread, watching the two of them with the alert interest of a kid who loves the people he lives with and is not yet old enough to hide it. She sat down. She picked up her fork. "It's good?" she said, meaning the soup. "It's bread and soup," Caleb said. "I know what it is," she said. "I said it's good." He sat across from her, looked at her, the near smile, the face behind the face. "It is," he said, and it was the bread and the soup and the practice, with the sign on the door and the boy eating lunch across the table, and the man who'd left the door open, and the forge burning steady in the other room, and the town outside that was learning slowly and imperfectly, and in the way that only real things change, who she was. All of it. It was good. Evelyn Carter had walked 300 miles looking for a place the world couldn't take from her, and she had found it not at the end of the road, but the moment she stopped planning her escape from it,